Whew. I got bad news. Your script, it's got weak scenes. But don't worry, we can fix it. And you do need to fix it, because it doesn't matter if you have an awesome story or captivating characters. A script with weak scenes is like a brick wall built out of red sponges. It's just not going to do what a wall needs to do. In this video, I'm going to help you write stronger scenes, whether you're a newbie taking your first crack at a script or an experienced screenwriter who wants to up your game to the next level. Along the way, I'm going to write an example scene so you get a better idea of what I'm talking about. I'm going to get into the example scene in just a second, but there are a couple of super important things we should cover first that are really going to help you out. Technically, a scene is everything that happens in your script in one place at one time. If you go to another place or another time, you're in a new scene. This can cause confusion because sometimes there's things in your scripts that feel like one scene, even though they're technically two or more scenes. For instance, imagine a couple having an argument. If the argument all takes place in one place, that's one scene. But if the argument starts inside their house and then they go outside their house, technically that's two different scenes because you went from an interior to an exterior. But it's just one argument, right? It kind of feels like one thing. So if you have several scenes in a row that are all connected into one thing, we call that a sequence. You can think of sequences kind of like a scene in storytelling terms, and in this video, I might talk about a sequence and treat it like it's just a scene, because it's sort of one thing. In storytelling terms, we'd call that one thing a beat of your story. It's generally when something happens, when something changes. Before you write your scene, you need to think about what the point of it is. Why does this scene need to be in your script? The point could be to show that your character is still in love with their ex, or for the detective to find the next clue that leads them to solving the mystery, or it could be a million other things depending on what your story is. But if you can't think of a good reason for the scene to be in your script, if it doesn't really have a point, cut it. Congratulations, your script is already better. Cutting the weak scenes helps the other scenes shine. But if the scene does have a point, keep that point in your mind as you're writing the scene. And as you go, check in to make sure you're staying on point and not going off on some wild tangent. This one simple trick will help make your script 34% better. I just made that number up, but it feels true. There's one more thing you should do before you start writing your scene, and that's ask yourself David Mamet's 3 questions, which I keep right there as a reminder. Those 3 questions are: who wants what? What happens if they don't get it? Why now? Our scripts are driven by what our characters want. That's true for the whole story, but also for the individual scenes. The character wanting something motivates the scene to happen, and it's tied into what the point of the scene is. So ask yourself, who wants what in your scene? If no one wants anything, your scenes are going to be very slow and lifeless and not very interesting. The next question, what happens if they don't get it, speaks to something we call stakes. What's at stake? What are the consequences of failure? When there are consequences, there's a lot more urgency and power in the scenes because it matters if the character succeeds or fails. If it doesn't matter, then who cares? Why are we reading the scene? Why now speaks to the urgency or immediacy of the scene. What's prompted this? Why are we dealing with it now? Why is it important for this part of your story? Having strong answers to these questions is going to make your scenes so much more dramatic. Mamet wrote, "Every scene must be dramatic. That means the main character must have a simple, straightforward, pressing need which impels him or her to show up in this scene. This need is why they came. It is what the scene is about. Their attempt to get this need met will lead, at the end of the scene, to failure. This is how the scene is over. This failure, will then, of necessity, propel us into the next scene." The really awesome thing about this approach is not only will it make your scenes more dramatic, but it also gives you the structure of your scene. Because your scenes, like your whole story, have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and those 3 things match up with what Mamet was saying. The scene begins because the character has a simple, straightforward, pressing need which impels him or her to show up in the scene. The middle of the scene is the attempt to get this need met. And the scene ends with their failure to get what they need, which then propels us into the next scene. Does the scene always end in failure? Sorta. It is at least partially a failure unless it's at the end of the script because they haven't got the big thing that they want, right? There's still something more that they need. Or it could be a failure in the sense that they wanted one thing but got another thing if that other thing moves the story forward. Now that we get the big picture, let's dive into the details. And this is where I'm going to start writing my example scene. My example scene is going to be really simple and pretty goofy. It's going to be about me taking my dog Marlowe outside to do his business, as they say. Here's Marlowe. He is a very scruffy boy. So that answers what the character wants, for his dog to go number 2. What about the second question? What happens if they don't get it? Well, in this scenario, I'm going to have it so that my wife asked me to take the dog outside to go to the bathroom for some important reason, which I'll reveal later as I'm writing the scene. And I'm also going to be running late for some kind of appointment that I need to get to that's important to me. So either the bad thing that I'll reveal later is going to happen, or I'm going to miss this appointment. And I think that also answers the third question of why now. But I said each of your scenes should have a point. So let's take this a step deeper and give it a point. Let's pretend this isn't just an example scene that I'm writing for you guys, but it's part of a larger script. And the story is that Micah needs to learn patience because he's very impatient and anxious. Totally fictional. In real life, they call me Professor Patience. And yes, I do have tenure. So the point of the scene at this part of the story is going to be to demonstrate Micah's problems with patience and anxiety. Can you feel how we haven't even written the scene yet, but by asking ourselves these questions, it's already starting to feel dramatic and kind of compelling? I'm going to be writing this scene in Arc Studio, which is the screenwriting app I normally use, and it's the company that's bringing you this video. You can use Arc Studio to start writing your own script for free by clicking the link in the description, or you can just Google Arc Studio screenwriting. Oh, and while you're here, why not like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you can get more helpful screenwriting content like this. There's a saying in screenwriting that you should have your scene start as late as possible. And what that means is that at the beginning of the scene, you cut out anything that doesn't have to do with why this is happening or what the character wants. So start your scene as late as possible. I'm going to start my scene with a scene heading, like you do. And I'll keep it pretty simple. We'll just do exterior, bungalow, apartment, day. We know where we are and that it's daytime. Now what? Well, we need to establish what this location is like, who's here, and what they're doing. This means we need some action and description. And if this is the first time you're introducing a character in a script, you need to write their name in all caps and give them a little description. Okay, so we did a couple of things there. We said what was happening, we introduced the character, had a little description, but one thing I want to highlight is the verbs that I used. I said hustles and pulling and clutching. So with these verbs, I'm already giving a sense of like the vibe of the scene and what's going on and who this person is, that he's impatient, that he's anxious. It wasn't that he walked out, he didn't lead the dog, he wasn't holding his phone. Everything's kind of tense here. When you're introducing characters, you want to give a sense of what their deal is. Like, what's their vibe? What are they all about? It's really helpful to have them doing something. You can also include physical description of your characters. Like, I could say a super handsome man, Micah Craddy, and then I can cut male here because I said man. A super handsome man, Micah Craddy, late 30s, hustles out of the apartment. Don't judge me. It's my scene. I can do whatever I want. If you want to go more in depth about how to write character intros, I wrote a blog post about it and I'll link to it in the description. Oh, and I should mention we're already seeding that there's conflict here, right? Pulling the dog's reluctant, there's tension here, there's conflict. And while we're here, we might as well change late 30s to 30s, because is 39 really late 30s? Maybe early 30s or, you know what, late 20s. That's the beauty of writing. This Micah's hair is not turning gray. Okay, I think we can do a little more here. I want to set the scene and get across what Micah wants, what the goal is. So now we have our scene set up. We know Micah has a goal here. He's running late. That's what this Google Maps thing shows us. And we've introduced an obstacle. The dog isn't pooping. So when you have a character who wants something and they encounter an obstacle, you get conflict, which is fantastic. One thing to say about the goal and obstacle in this scene is that Micah never says, I'm running late, I have somewhere to go. And he also doesn't say, Marlowe, you're keeping me from getting to the thing I want to. You're an obstacle. This is causing conflict. Just show it and the audience will get what you're doing. We've also established the tone, which is something you need to do. This script is kind of goofy, and the comedy comes from Micah being really anxious and the dog just like being reluctant and wanting pets. So in your own scene, what's the tone? Is it goofy? Is it scary? Is it tense? Is it thrilling? Make sure you establish that off the bat. We're also establishing the point of view of the scene, or POV. We're going to be experiencing this scene through Micah. We're going to be experiencing his emotions, and kind of he's our eyes into the world. And finally, I'm showing off a little of my own voice as the writer. I'm making it fun. I want it to be fun to read. Okay, I think we have a good beginning here. Let's move on to the middle. The middle of the scene is where your character attempts to overcome the obstacle in order to get whatever it is that they want. But you're not just servicing the plot. How your character deals with these obstacles reveals who they are at this point in your story. For instance, in my scene, how Micah deals with the obstacle of the dog not wanting to poop reveals that he's impatient and anxious. And that's why, even though this scene is kind of silly, it's actually a really good conflict to explore Micah's issues, because people who deal with impatience and anxiety struggle with things they cannot control, and Micah cannot control what happens with the dog in this scene, because you can lead a dog to grass, but you can't make it poop. So when you're thinking of the obstacles in your own scene, try to think of obstacles that are going to help illustrate the point, like what it's all about. And choose obstacles that are difficult particularly for that character because they deal with that character's flaws. But you don't want to just do the same thing over. It can get repetitive, it's boring, it's predictable. You want to escalate things, make it worse, make it more intense, but you also want to switch things up, throw in some twists, throw in a surprise. Finally, in the middle, you can also try something called a false victory, which is where your character thinks that they've got where they want, but they really haven't, and it just makes things worse. So let's take a look back at our scene. We know what Micah wants, we know what the obstacle is, but we don't really know why this matters, right? Like, what are the consequences of failure? What are the stakes? I have an idea that I think will help. So I added a phone call from Micah's wife to this script, and this really helped to up the stakes. It introduced this idea that the dog has to poop because there's a medical condition, and if he doesn't poop, it means the dog needs surgery, so we need to know that this happened. And then there's this other thing where she says, "I thought you said you could handle this for me." And I used this then, which is a pause, which kind of is a parenthetical. A parenthetical addresses how someone says something or what they're doing while they say it, or you can use like a then or a pause here to indicate that, there's a little pause. And so by doing this then, it kind of like makes the second thing stand out. I thought you said you could handle this for me. And it sort of hints that like maybe there's something deeper going on in their relationship that's a problem, if he can't do this. Again, totally fictional. I never struggle with doing things that I said that I would. And finally, this is how I like to format phone calls. I do phone next to the character that's on the other end. This is if you're not seeing both sides. You can also do an intercut and we see both people, but in this one, we're only seeing Micah. We're hearing Chantal on the phone, so that's why it says phone. And I also like to put the person on the phone's dialogue in italics, just because it has that different sound quality, of like hearing it through a phone. And you don't have to do this, but that's how I like to do it. Also, instead of phone, a lot of times people will do VO. I think that might actually even be like the way you're supposed to do it, but I just like doing phone. That's my preference. What can we do to make it even juicier? I'll give you a second to think before I give my answer. But if we've just given some reason for him to stay, maybe we can add some motivation for him to leave. Okay, so now there's a clock on the situation, which is another thing you can do to make your scenes more compelling. We have a push and a pull from his wife and from this guy Joe, who has something that Micah wants. I added this thing here, TK thing Micah really wants, not because I'm lazy, but because this is something you can do in your script when you're actually going to change that to that. When you know that there's like something that's going to be here, but you don't know what, you haven't figured it out yet, but you want to keep going. You want to keep your momentum going. You can just write like TK this. TK means to come, which means that it's going to come later on. It should be TC, but the K stands out a little bit more. Yeah, so that's really helpful. Later, you just come back and like fill in whatever this thing is. It's also great for situations where you need to do some research or something, but you're writing and you don't want to get like lost in, Wikipedia for like half an hour. Okay, back to our scene. How can we make this better? Well, it's kind of static, right? Like Micah's just standing there, the dog's just sitting there or like rolling around. Not much is going on. It's not very cinematic. If I was doing a rewrite on this, I might change that from the beginning, have him walking the whole time. But just at this point, let's throw a little action in. Okay, so I changed up the energy. I had them running. Micah was trying to make the dog run so that it would poop. Shake it out, I guess it kind of makes sense. But I also threw in something else that I mentioned earlier. Did you catch what it is? If you guessed false victory, that's right. I had this thing here where they stop at the grass, Marlowe walks to it, and he squats, right? So he's about to poop. But then it doesn't happen. And even better, I made Micah, the character, shoot himself in the foot. Because what's the thing that he's been dealing with? Like impatience, right? So by him being impatient and kind of shouting yes, he actually startles the dog, and so he doesn't actually poop. So throwing in a false victory is great. Having your character shoot themselves in the foot because of their own flaws is great. These are all things that you can add to your scene. By the way, text messages are still kind of new in the world of screenwriting, which makes me sound very old, I know, but there isn't really a standardized way of doing it. I just did it like this, where I said that there was a text from Joe, and then I wrote it italic so you can see it. But another thing that you can do sometimes is people will say like, Joe here, text, or a text message, and then actually change this here to a dialogue element like that, which kind of makes sense because text messages are a dialogue in some sense, especially if you have them going back and forth. But this is another way that you can write your text message. All right, I'm having too much fun with this scene. I could probably go on for a long time, but we should bring this to a close. Let's talk about endings. So your scene started because the character wanted something, the middle was them trying to get it, and in the end, they either succeed or fail. Usually they fail, but sometimes there can be like a success, but there's a catch. The important thing is that the end of the scene doesn't just bring things to a halt. It moves the story forward. And with the ending, you also want to check back in with the point of the scene, right? Have you accomplished what you set out to do? So I set out to demonstrate that Micah is impatient and has some anxiety issues, and I think I've done that so far, but with the ending, you can really reinforce the point. If this was the end of the script, like the end of my story, I might do something where like Micah has learned his lesson, right? And he acts with patience. He just kind of like calmly walks around the neighborhood and just says like, oh, I'll buy that, whatever that thing he wanted to buy. I'll get the next one. And, he just waits for the dog to go and then everything's fine and he doesn't get in trouble with his wife. But this isn't the end of the story. I need to do things that are going to set up more conflicts, more problems, more scenes to come, and make the audience want to read those scenes or watch those scenes. I can accomplish that by having Micah make a bad choice. Bad choices are great. Like I said, choices reveal who your characters are. Bad choices reveal bad things about them. Bad choices also lead to consequences down the line, which means your character is going to have more stuff to deal with, which is fantastic. It's not always bad choices. Like your character can make good choices. Sometimes those good choices will turn out the way they want, and sometimes they won't. But it really depends on the situation in your script. I also did a thing where I had them run away from the house in the scene, and I kind of want this to end back at the house. I could have them run back, but I kind of want to skip forward on that. So I'm actually going to end this scene by writing a new scene. And this ties into the sequence thing I was talking about. Technically, I'm going to have two scenes, but they really kind of function together as like one scene in terms of the story. Micah really should not left his dog like tied up in the front of the bungalow. That's a bad choice and something I would never do in real life. But in fiction, it's going to lead to problems. There's something else I did here, which is foreshadowing. I said, do not chew through the leash. And that's a good indication that perhaps this dog is not going to be where we left it when we return. You can see I've ended this scene or sequence, but I've kept the story moving, right? We want to know what happens next. Is Micah going to get to the place in time? When he gets back, is the dog going to be there? Is his wife going to get back before he does? Is the dog sick? Is the dog going to be dead or something when he gets back? There's all these questions that the audience is going to be asking themselves. And you really want the audience to be asking questions because it means they're invested and they want to stick around to find out what the answers are. This scene was kind of a mini story all on its own, a mini arc, if you will. And that's kind of how you write a script. You build your big story out of a lot of little compelling stories along the way. All right, that's it for now. I really hope this helps you write better scenes. From all of us at ARC Studio, good luck with your script, be kind to yourselves, and happy writing.